This is not some woo biology thing. Those neurons respond best to bright light, and especially right after waking early in the day. Fundamentally speaking, get that morning sunlight viewing. I promise you will be grateful that you did. Good idea to make your sleeping environment cool. In fact, food, not just what you eat, but when you eat. So let's say you do exercise late in the day and you're finding yourself very alert in the evening and you need to fall asleep. Ways to leverage caffeine use to optimize sleep and wakefulness if you are comfortable with caffeine. And the three main supplements in that. I think the world is largely on board now that sleep is critical to our health. Put simply, sleep is the foundation of mental health, physical health, and performance of all kinds, cognitive performance, physical performance, etc. It also controls things like our immune system, wound healing, our skin health, and our appearance, whether or not we can think clearly or not, whether or not we will live as long as we possibly can or not, whether or not we suffer from dramatic age-related cognitive decline or not. I could go on and on about all the terrible things that can happen to somebody if they don't sleep well. The main levers and tools that are going to allow you to control when you are awake and when you are asleep and to get better sleep every single night are light, literally photons, light energy. Could be from sunlight, could be from artificial light. We will discuss those particulars in a moment, as well as darkness. That is the absence of light. So we've got light and dark. Those are two very powerful tools to encourage your nervous system to be in one state or another, meaning awake or asleep. Temperature, food, and when we say food, we mean what we eat, when we eat, and the amount that we eat. Okay, so light, dark, temperature, food, exercise, and of course exercise comes in different forms. Another potent lever for adjusting your sleepiness and wakefulness is caffeine. This, of course, comes as no surprise to people. The other category of lever tools, which are immensely powerful for optimizing sleep, are supplements. Everybody, whether or not you live in a cloudy place or a sunny place, whether or not there's cloud cover or not that day, should really strive to get bright light in your eyes, ideally from sunlight, within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. The reason for that is very simple. You want to trigger that cortisol increase to occur very early in your day. And you don't want that cortisol peak to happen later, which is what will happen if you wait to get outside and see sunlight. The reason for this is that you have a set of neurons, nerve cells in your eye. They're called intrinsically photosensitive melanopsin cells, but you do not need to know that name. Those neurons respond best to bright light, and especially right after waking early in the day, they are best able to signal to a set of neurons that reside over the roof of your mouth, called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is a cluster of neurons that then sends a huge number of other signals, electrical and chemical, out to your entire body that triggers that cortisol increase, provides a wake-up signal for your brain and body, and sets in motion a timer for you to fall asleep later that night. There's so many different wavelengths of light coming from the sun, and they are bright enough that they will trigger the mechanisms that you want triggered at this early time of day. So try and get outside, ideally within the first 5 minutes of waking, or maybe it's 15 minutes, but certainly within the first hour after waking. I want to share with you three critical things about this tool of morning sunlight viewing. First of all, this is not some woo biology thing. This is grounded in the core of our physiology. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of quality peer-reviewed papers showing that light viewing early in the day is the most powerful stimulus for wakefulness throughout the day, and it has a powerful positive impact on your ability to fall and stay asleep at night. So this is really the foundational power tool for ensuring a great night's sleep and for feeling more awake during the day. Some of you will wake up before the sun comes out, and if you're asking whether or not turning on artificial lights can replace sunlight at those hours, unfortunately, the answer is no. Unless you have a very special light, we'll talk about what kind of light, the bright artificial lights in your home environment are not, I repeat, are not going to be sufficiently bright to turn on the cortisol mechanism and the other wake-up mechanisms that you need early in the day. And artificial lights generally just won't accomplish what you need them to accomplish. But at night, even a little bit of artificial light can really mess up your so-called circadian, your 24-hour clocks, and all these mechanisms that we're talking about. So if you wake up before the sun is out and it's still dark, please turn on as many bright artificial lights as you possibly can or need, but then get outside once the sun is out. On cloudy days, you especially need to get outside. I repeat, on cloudy days, overcast days, you especially need to get outside and get sunlight. You just need to get more of it. Now, how much light and how much light viewing do you need? This is going to vary depending on person and place, literally where you live on Earth, whether or not there's a lot of tree cover, whether or not you're somebody who has sensitive eyes or less sensitive eyes. It's really impossible for me to give an absolute prescriptive, but we can give some general guidelines. In general, on a clear day, meaning no cloud cover or minimal cloud cover, you want to get this sunlight exposure to your eyes for about 5 minutes or so. Could be 3 minutes one day, could be 7 minutes the next day, about 5 minutes. On a day where there's cloud cover, so the sun is just peeking through the clouds or it's more dense cloud cover, you want to get about 10 minutes of sunlight exposure to your eyes early in the day. And on days that are really densely overcast or maybe even are rainy, you're going to want to get as much as 20 or 30 minutes of sunlight exposure. Another key thing is do not forget about, just don't try and get this sunlight exposure through a windshield of a car or a window, whether or not it's tinted or otherwise. It takes far too long. It's simply not going to trigger the relevant mechanisms. You would be standing there all day trying to get enough light into your eyes from the morning sunlight, and by then the sun will have already moved from low solar angle to overhead, and it simply won't work for all sorts of mechanisms related to your circadian rhythm functions. So just don't try and do it through a windshield, sunglasses, or a window. Now, if you live in a part of the world where it's extremely dark and overcast, or the weather won't let you outside, or you live in a cave or some other small box that does not allow any natural light into it, for whatever reason, well, then you're going to need a replacement for that sunlight. And there are sunlight simulators or daylight simulators that you can purchase. Those are quite expensive in general. And therefore, I suggest cheaper options that work just as well because they get just as bright. Things like ring lights that are sold in order for people to take selfies and this kind of thing. A drawing LED tablet will work pretty well. I actually have one of those and I put it on my desk all morning, even though I still get outside and look at sunlight first thing in the morning. Again, also, especially, I should say, on cloudy days. Make sure you do this practice at least 80% of the days of your life. That's right. If you miss a day, for instance, you're bedridden for a day, try and get next to a window. Let's say you are traveling or for whatever reason, you are not able to get outside first thing in the morning. Well, then try to get twice as much sunlight in your eyes, or I should say extend the duration of sunlight viewing in the morning for twice as long the following day. This is a slow integrative mechanism that underlies this whole thing of wakefulness during the day and sleep at night due to sunlight viewing. And if you miss a day, you can make up for it the next day, but you have to get twice as much light or twice as much duration of light. Fundamentally speaking, get that morning sunlight viewing. I promise you will be grateful that you did. It makes everybody feel better, feel more alert, and it will greatly assist with your ability to fall and stay asleep later that night. Once you've woken up and you want to be awake, okay, so this is likely to be early in the day if you're following a more standard schedule, you will also want to leverage not just light, but temperature as a tool. If you are inclined, it would be wise to try and increase your core body temperature a bit more quickly than it would otherwise if you were to just, shuffle around outside, get your sunlight, maybe read a little bit, etc. And there are two main ways you can do that. The first way is to get into cold water of some sort. So this could be a cold shower of anywhere from 1 to 3 minutes. This could be an ice bath if that's your thing. It could be a cold tub, or if you own a cold tub that's specifically designed for deliberate cold exposure, get under some cold water. That will certainly wake you up. And if you've ever jumped into cold water or had a cold shower, you know it really wakes you up because you release adrenaline, epinephrine from both your brain and body. 1 to 3 minutes of cold water exposure will wake you up because of that adrenaline release, and I want to highlight the and, it will serve to increase your core body temperature. That's right. But really the increase in body temperature is one of the main triggers for why you woke up in the first place. That increase in body temperature, in turn, causes an increase in the release of a hormone called cortisol. Cortisol is often discussed as a stress hormone, but it's not just associated with stress. It also enhances your immune system, provided cortisol is elevated at the right times. And the right time for cortisol to be elevated is when you first wake up in the morning. That increase in cortisol is also going to increase metabolism. It's also going to increase your ability to focus mentally and for you to move your body. So again, cortisol is often demonized and considered this bad thing. And indeed, you don't want cortisol to be chronically or consistently elevated throughout the day or night. But you do want cortisol to reach its peak early in the day, right about the time you wake up. One way that you can ensure that that cortisol peak occurs early in the day, right about the time that you wake up, is to view bright light, ideally from sunlight, within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. That's right. View bright sunlight within the first 30 to 60 minutes after waking. So if you're somebody that enjoys hot baths, hot showers, or hot tubs, evening and nighttime is going to be the best time to do that if your goal is to facilitate sleep. Similarly, you should try and make your sleeping environment pretty cool, if not cold. Now, that doesn't mean you need to be cold while you're asleep. You can get under as many blankets as you need, but it's a good idea to make your sleeping environment cool. In fact, drop the temperature in that sleeping environment by at least 3 degrees, and you'll be happy that you did. Again, depends on time of year, depends on technology, depends on budgets, etc. But you're going to want to sleep in a relatively cool or cold sleeping environment and then layer on the blankets as needed to stay asleep. Now, the other lever or tool that you have available to you is food, not just what you eat, but when you eat. And it turns out that if you eat early in the day, you support a biological clock mechanism that will make you more alert early in the day. That said, many people choose to fast in the early morning hours of the day or in the first part of the day. I'm one such person. I generally don't ingest any food until about 11 a.m. or 12 noon. However, some people are really hungry when they wake up in the morning. Just know that if you eat early in the day, you are further triggering an increase in metabolism and in temperature that will make you more alert. So you don't have to eat early in the day, but you can start to see how these different tools layer together. Sunlight viewing, exercise, cold water, eating. Many of them are converging on the same mechanisms. In fact, when you drink caffeine, there's also a small increase in body temperature due to the adrenaline increase that it stimulates. So all of these things can be layered on top of one another, or you can use them individually or think about them individually. Now, food is an interesting lever or tool because it's not just about when you eat, but it's also about what you eat. It's up to you whether or not to eat first thing in the morning or not. But if you do eat in the first few hours of the morning, just understand that you are setting or you're helping to set a food entrained, as it's called, circadian clock. Light, temperature, timing of food intake, movement and exercise, all of these things literally funnel in a neural sense. They funnel into this thing that we call the circadian clock, and they let that clock, that set of neurons, predict when you are likely to be eating and active and viewing sunlight the next day and the next day and the next day. And we have exercise. One of the best ways to increase your core body temperature early in the day is to do exercise. Now, some of you might choose to do your full-blown workout for the day first thing when you wake up in the morning. I always say the best time to exercise, at least what the research points to, is immediately when you wake up in the morning, or 3 hours after waking, or 11 hours after waking. But that's really getting down into optimization for sake of muscular strength and grip strength, and it's very hard to give a strict prescriptive. Here's what I suggest. If you want to be alert early in the day and you want to sleep great at night, get that bright sunlight, get into some cold water, and if you don't want to get into some cold water, try and get some movement. It could be a walk so you can get your sunlight exposure while you're taking a walk first thing in the morning. It could be a light jog. It could be skipping rope. And again, it doesn't have to be your full-blown workout for the day if you're doing workouts consistently, which I hope everybody is, because everybody really should exercise at least, I believe, 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 days a week. For me, it's 6 days a week, sometimes 5. Rarely is it 7. So get that exercise or even just a modest amount of movement, walking, jogging, skipping rope, some light calisthenics. That will further increase your core body temperature and help you feel more awake. And for those of you that exercise in the afternoon, understand that if you exercise very intensely, so this might be weight training or running or some other very intense exercise, typically that's going to further increase your body temperature. Makes sense, right? Based on everything we know about metabolism and body temperature. And it's going to so-called delay your circadian clock. It's going to make it such that you want to fall asleep a little bit later, maybe even a lot later. So if you're exercising in the afternoon or evening, and that's the only time you can exercise, or that's the time that you prefer to exercise, great. But be careful about ingesting too much caffeine in order to get the energy to do that exercise, because that caffeine will disrupt your sleep. And just know that you are delaying your circadian clock. You are making it such that you will naturally want to go to sleep later and wake up later. Contrast that with if you exercise early in the day, say immediately after waking up or in the first 0 to 4 hours after waking. In most cases, that's not going to shift your circadian clock much. And so let's say you do exercise late in the day and you're finding yourself very alert in the evening and you need to fall asleep. Or let's say you've exercised and you needed 4 cups of espresso in order to do that exercise. Well, there are a few things that you can do to try and bring your nervous system down into more state of calmness, and you can do that also by lowering your core body temperature. One of those I already talked about before, taking a nice hot shower or a hot bath and then getting out and cooling off will decrease your body temperature. Maybe not enough to get you into sleep if you have a ton of caffeine in your system. But again, you can use this mechanism of temperature shifts to wake up or temperature shifts to fall asleep in ways that really can help you overcome some of the irregularities in your sleep-wake cycle and exercise cycle, et cetera. Because, of course, nobody's perfect. Some days we end up having to work out in the afternoon or we'll miss the workout entirely. Other days we end up having that cup of coffee in the afternoon with a friend and then we have a hard time falling asleep. So the next category of tool for use early in the day is caffeine. Caffeine is a very important compound to think about. I do realize that some people who are prone to anxiety, especially panic attacks and anxiety attacks, might avoid caffeine entirely. That's absolutely fine. You do not have to drink caffeine. So what I'm about to describe are ways to leverage caffeine use to optimize sleep and wakefulness if you are comfortable with caffeine, if you like caffeine. I happen to love caffeine. I like it in the form of coffee or espresso or yerba mate tea. So caffeine is something that a lot of people consume early in the day. How much depends on your tolerance, and there's a lot of individual variability here. Again, caffeine is a adenosine antagonist, or effectively works as a adenosine antagonist and limits sleepiness. I highly recommend that everybody delay their caffeine intake for 90 to 120 minutes after waking. However painful it may be to eventually arrive at that 90 to 120 minutes after waking, you want, and I encourage you to clear out whatever residual adenosine is circulating in your system in that first 90 to 120 minutes of the day. Get that sunlight exposure, get some movement to wake up, and then, and only then, start to ingest caffeine. Because what you'll do if you delay caffeine intake until 90 to 120 minutes after waking is you will avoid this so-called afternoon crash. And you may still get a little bit of dip in energy in the afternoon, but it's not going to be that massive crash. Really try and avoid any caffeine. Certainly avoid drinking more than 100 milligrams of caffeine after 4 p.m. And probably even better to limit your last caffeine intake to 3 p.m. or even 2 p.m. And for many people, shifting that caffeine intake from immediately after waking in the morning to 90 to 120 minutes gives them a much longer arc of energy throughout the day, and they don't feel the need to drink more caffeine later in the afternoon. Caffeine intake late in the day, after 4 p.m. that is, can really disrupt the architecture of your sleep. So you might think you're sleeping well, but you're not sleeping nearly as well as you could if you avoided caffeine in those afternoon hours. There are supplements that for most people will greatly improve their ability to fall and stay asleep. And the 3 main supplements in that category or that kit of sleep supplements, and I've talked about these before, are magnesium threonate, so THREONATE, apigenin, 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 and theanine, THEANINE, theanine. Now, some important things to point out about mag-threonate, as it's called, apigenin, and theanine. First of all, you don't necessarily need to take all 3, although many people get a synergistic effect from taking all 3. In fact, you may not even need to take even one. What I recommend is that if you're already doing all the behavioral tools regularly and you're still having trouble falling asleep and staying asleep, well then you might try one of the supplements within this sleep stack. They do have fairly wide margins for safety, although I should also say anytime you're going to add or remove something from your supplement protocol, your nutritional program, you definitely want to talk to your physician. I don't just say that to protect us. I say that to protect you. But for most people, the margins of safety on these things are going to be pretty broad. A couple of notes about dosages. For some people, the dosages of any one or several of the supplements I mentioned will be 0. That is, you won't need them in order to get and stay asleep most nights of your life. That's terrific if you don't need them. For many people, however, taking 145 milligrams of magnesium threonate can be very beneficial. That's the dosage that most people will benefit from. Some people need to go a little higher. Some people need to go a little bit lower. One of the reasons that we've been pointing people towards single ingredient formulations these days is because it allows people to adjust the dosage of one component of a so-called sleep stack without having to disrupt the dosage of another component, and so on. It also allows people to try just one element within the sleep stack without having to purchase and try the others, which is a problem if you're buying a blend of a lot of different ingredients. So 145 milligrams of magnesium threonate, 50 milligrams of apigenin, and again, you could just take the apigenin on its own, and 100 to 400 milligrams of theanine taken, again, alone or in combination with the other supplements mentioned in this stack. Many people find allows them to get really drowsy and fall asleep, sleep really deeply, and they feel much more refreshed the next day and they don't have a grogginess. Again, all of this is really about finding the supplementation protocol that's ideal for you. I should mention that whether or not you're taking 1 or 2 or 3 of the components of the sleep stack, the ideal time to take those is 30 to 60 minutes before bedtime, especially if you haven't had anything to eat for the 3 hours or so before bedtime. That sleep stack can be very beneficial, and I do think that it's preferable to melatonin. Here's the reason. First of all, melatonin is a hormone that you endogenously make. You now know a lot about melatonin and its control by light, meaning light inhibits it or eliminates it. Darkness promotes it. And melatonin indeed can help us fall asleep. But the dosages of melatonin that are contained in most commercial products is far, far, far greater than what we would make endogenously. So it's really supra-physiological. So that's of concern because melatonin is not just responsible for making us sleepy and fall asleep. It also does things like interacts with other hormone systems, testosterone and estrogen, even in the puberty system in kids. Is taking melatonin every once in a while a problem for adjusting to jet lag, et cetera? Probably not. I would even say no. But taking it chronically over time, especially kids taking it chronically over time, can potentially be problematic. So at least in my opinion, these other supplements are going to be preferable to melatonin.